Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle housing market watch for July 31st, 2025. Well, we're doing something a little different here in July. Had a couple different vacations. So what I did is we did a first half of the month and a second half of the month market watch. And I'd love your thoughts on this. If you like this better than the every single week market watches, for me, it's fun to see a little bit bigger sample size as we're looking at some of this data. And of course, we're going to keep doing the monthly market updates, but I'd love some thoughts about these 2-week samples instead of 1-week samples for King and Snohomish County. And as we're looking at the data here, we're seeing that the amount of inventory is actually shrinking a tiny bit, at least from what I can tell over the past month. And it looks like as we start August that we're going to have a little bit lower inventory in King and Snohomish County heading into the month. So interesting. It's every summer is in this area slower as far as the amount of buyers. And you tend to have a ton of listings building up in the spring and early summer, but not as many people that are actively searching. Again, people taking vacations and such. Now, it is common. I've heard somebody actually commented on this about the people wanting to buy before their kids are back in school. And that is a factor for some people, but there are more people, it seems like, buying that are not thinking about that than are. And so it doesn't seem to be a big factor in our market, whether people are trying to buy before school starts. A lot of those people didn't just start searching right now. They've been searching for a while. Anyways, let's talk about the stats here over the last week. Let's start with that, and then we'll talk a little bit about the couple week averages here in King and Snohomish County. As we're heading into the new month, we're going to have some market stats for the entire month, and we'll be able to talk about some of that data here soon. But as we're looking at new listings, we had 698 new listings over the last week. And when we looked a couple weeks back at the 15th, we saw 994 listings over that same week. And last week we had fewer listings as well than the 994. So we've seen a little bit less coming on the market over these past few weeks than we did earlier on in the summer and in the spring. We also saw fewer price reductions this week. A couple weeks ago, we saw 756 price reductions. We only saw 579 price reductions this past week. Still a lot of price reductions, right? We're still seeing a lot of houses not selling for the asking price, at least the original asking price, and then selling for less. But we're also seeing more contingent purchases. So 28 contingent purchases over the last week. We had 14 contingent purchases a couple weeks back in King and Snohomish County. And the contingent purchases are interesting because this means, if you're unfamiliar with this term, that somebody had to buy, but they also needed to sell their house before they could qualify to buy their new house. So there was the combination of those two factors as part of the transaction. That's very rare when the market is super competitive because sellers can choose a different buyer, a buyer that doesn't have that contingency. But in this case, we are seeing houses that have been on the market long enough where sellers are willing to accept a situation like that. And even me, when I sold my Edmonds house a few years ago, we accepted a contingent offer. The house had been on the market for a while. The market was slow. This was back in 2023, and it made sense for us to take that offer. Why would we not when we have a buyer that's legitimate? We thought the house would sell quickly, which it did. It sold in a week. They priced it really competitively, a little bit below market to get it sold. So we knew what the situation was. And I think there are other sellers open to that idea right now in this current market. And we've been talking about this over the past few months. It's been slow. It's been slowing down, but there are still plenty of houses selling quickly, but more that are taking longer, that are selling for less than the original asking price. And we're seeing that here as far as the activity goes. 792 pending sales over the past week. A couple weeks back, we had 810 pending sales. So that activity from the buyers has remained about the same, but the amount of new listings has been dropping. And what that means is that some of the inventory is coming off the market. And that's what, as far as the sellers are concerned, that's what they want to see. They want to see less inventory total. They want to see fewer houses on the market and then more competition for their listings. That's how we see prices going up in our market versus seeing prices slowing down, maybe going down. So right now, there's not a big shift, but it has become a little bit more competitive over the past couple weeks. And we'll see that in the 2-week sample of King and Snohomish County here in a minute. Before we do that, though, let's talk about interest rates. Mortgage News Daily survey shows a 6.75% rate as of 7/30. That's their average for the 30-year fixed. A couple weeks ago it was 6.85. It's really still hovering in that upper sixes range. We've been talking about low sevens, upper sixes. Not too much of a change, but a little bit lower than it was. But I think as we're seeing the numbers, and let's shift over to King County's data here, we're seeing a median price over the past couple weeks of $999, $975, which is a little more than the $975 that we saw a couple weeks back for the first part of the month. We also, in King County, saw houses selling over asking price over the last couple weeks, 1% above asking price. We were seeing houses selling 1% below asking price a couple weeks ago. Again, not a ton of change in some of the competition metrics that we'll look at. So it could just be that there were certain houses, right, that were bringing this average up. And we talked about, and we will continue to talk about in the monthly update here coming up, that there are certain areas of King County and certain areas of Snohomish County where it's a little bit more competitive than others. And in King County in particular, there are a few spots, namely Seattle and Bellevue, and the really close-in areas that have become a little bit more desirable all of a sudden again because of proximity to downtown and work. So the pending sales, though, with multiple offers in King County, 24%. A couple weeks ago, that average was 25%. So for the past couple weeks, fewer multiple offer scenarios. But at the same time, more over asking price on average. So again, I mentioned there's probably some spots and sales that are pulling that average up. Pendings with escalation addendums, 8%. A couple weeks ago, 9% over the past 2 weeks. Pendings with the financing addendum, we saw 65% in the past couple weeks had that financing addendum, 70% on our last update 2 weeks ago. So a little bit fewer with the financing addendum. Inspection addendums, though, pretty much the same, 40%. This time around, 41% a couple weeks back. So not too much change there in some of those metrics. It's still slower, not as competitive in those scenarios, but what we're seeing is a little bit more was the average. So again, I think some of that is specific houses pulling that up, and again, specific areas versus a county-wide change or shift. We're still trending in a backwards direction as far as the competitive metrics are concerned. But again, the inventory has been shrinking a little bit. In Snohomish County as well, the inventory is a little bit lower than it was at the end of last month as well in Snohomish County. And we're seeing, again, pretty similar numbers to what we saw in the last update here for Snohomish County's numbers. Median sales price was $800 over the past couple weeks, $764, $900 at the 2-week mark in the month. The average pending price to list price ratio, we were just talking about that for King County, how that's up 1%. It's the same thing in Snohomish County, 98% a couple weeks back, 99% for the second half of the month here in Snohomish County. Multiple offers, actually a little bit more dramatic jump here. 20% for the first half of the month, 24% for the second half of the month. So a little bit more competition these past couple weeks in Snohomish County. Now, what hasn't changed a ton is the terms of the contract. So to me, this would just seem that, hey, there was an offer below asking price and an offer at asking price. Now, that's not necessarily the case because 6% both times, beginning of the month and end of the month, had those escalation addendums. We also saw the financing addendums, 80% a couple weeks back, 77% over the past couple weeks. And the inspection addendums, 47% versus 47% over the past couple weeks. So things haven't changed too much there. As I mentioned, the big change is the amount of multiple offers. So as we wrap up this update, I am seeing a little bit of a slowdown, right, as far as the amount of new listings, which always affects the inventory or the supply. And that's just how many houses are available on the market. And when that happens, you start to see a little bit more competition for the existing homes. We're not seeing a big change, though. So over this whole month, we've seen a modest change in the amount of new listings coming on the market with a decrease in the amount of new listings. The buyer activity has remained relatively stable here for the month as we're looking towards August. And what I would expect is for August to look a lot like July. Again, unless we have some big changes in some of the policy. And again, we're still keeping tabs on interest rates and the inflation numbers. Those are, and if we were to even pick one, the inflation numbers are going to be the bigger numbers to pay attention to. So if I was somebody watching this and trying to figure out like, hey, where are the mortgage rates going to head? And typically when the mortgage rates are a little bit lower, I think if we got around 6, things would be speeding up a lot. But if we watch the inflation numbers and those are trending downwards, that's going to be our best indicator that we're going to start to maybe see those mortgage rates coming down as a response to the inflation data, not necessarily the Fed rate, but the Fed rate will also help us here because that's also going to signal, hey, we got inflation under control. We don't want to be changing that, and that's why we haven't seen it changing yet with where inflation is currently. So if you have questions about the market, King County, Snohomish County, and you want to connect, I'd love to be a resource. And of course, if these videos are valuable for you and you want to follow along on a regular basis, please subscribe.